Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Mark Johnson. He's the Vice President for DoD Tech and Cloud at Oracle, and Eric Benner, the Vice President of Enterprise Transformation at Mythics. Gentlemen, good to have you with us today. And let's start with the migration of cloud strategy from the earlier strategy of cloud first, when the government was fairly new at this whole idea of moving to cloud computing, and that migrated to cloud smart strategies. What, in your estimation, is a smart cloud strategy? And maybe that includes sometimes going first with cloud. What's your take? Mark, we'll start with you.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having us on. I'm excited to be here today and excited to talk to our customers in the government who really are struggling in some cases with this cloud. I mean, we hear a lot about people that are leading out in the cloud. There's a lot of things government's doing, especially in this time. They've really jumped into it. But when you think about cloud smart, it really is about which cloud are you going to use, and are you going to even use cloud? I think that's part of the new guidance, relatively new guidance, and to help people think about governments have unique use cases. It's not like a commercial use case, and that sometimes a on-premise makes the most sense in association with appropriate cloud services. So you can build an entire ecosystem using the cloud and using your on-premise, where you control your data and your applications perhaps a little bit more. I think that's the essence of cloud smart, is this hybrid world of multi-cloud.
Yes, and Eric, I guess the implication is that because there are so many different possibilities of cloud providers, they're not created equal. So in some sense, you need to consider the particular qualities of the cloud vendors that you're talking to.
Yeah, and again, thank you for having me here today. And you do have to absolutely address that, and that's why you get into this multi-cloud approach to cloud. Not all clouds are equal, and with the second generation clouds, it's even a larger gap. The first generation clouds just don't make it easy to operate in. They make it difficult to change in the environment. They don't run legacy applications as well, and those are a lot of limitations. And they also have security as well. When you get to the second generation clouds that are out there, you're looking at better security. Things like the control planes that control the cloud are isolated from the cloud itself. It's the same standard the DoD uses to secure their internal networks. And it's the same philosophy that second generation clouds like Oracle have been applying. And that adds security. And that really points to the mission and to the workload. And with this approach of the cloud smart is you pick the right environment for the workload. And sometimes that means a different cloud provider than you are today.
And what you say also seems to say that also you need to have the right architecture in order to work with the clouds that you think are deemed best for the workload that you've got.
You need to have the right architecture for the cloud, but you also want to make sure you don't pick a cloud that requires you to re-architecture your application. I talk to CIOs all the time that are moving existing applications to the cloud, and often they're talking to cloud service providers that want to completely re-arch the application, and that adds a lot of expense to the project. It adds a lot of risk and uncertainty to it. So you need to be careful too. Pick a cloud technology that you go to that doesn't require that complete change to the environment.
Sure. And Mark, so how do you begin that thought process to be smart about cloud selection?
That's a great question. I think one of the things to think about is that you don't have to take your biggest application and figure out how you're going to move that to the cloud, what things you need to add, if you need to change anything. I think we take some of the developmental or test environments, user acceptance environments with non-sensitive data, and just start experimenting with different things in the cloud, especially as we talk about this multi-cloud architecture and the different technologies that are out there. So you may already be in the cloud and you may be interested in looking at another one. We've probably got something you can bring over there that's lightweight, small, easy to move, and easy to get going. That's the great thing about cloud is you can be confident in scaling up if you're going to need a very large environment, but start small, start with non-sensitive data so you don't have to worry about all that security and you can move fast. And then decide if you're going to adapt. As you see how it works, you may change some things. That's fine. That's great. It's easy to do in cloud.
So it sounds like the vendors you'd want to work with then will have that flexibility to give you a small start and testing and so forth. And then it's easy to scale rapidly once you decide, yeah, this is the way we want to go.
That's absolutely the case. Yeah. And that's some of the great things that we have now in the Oracle Cloud is that ability to scale, to flex, to automatically do this in many cases. So functions like the autonomous database, you bring it over and it actually figures out what you need and makes sure that you've got enough resources for the mission that you are executing.
And Eric, continuing on this thread of smart approach to cloud versus just simply going cloud first, who should be on that team? Who can evaluate all of the different qualities of performance and so on that the agency and the application owners and maybe the mission owners would want and expect from that particular cloud?
That's a really good question, because that's one of the challenges I've seen with my customers is they don't always have everyone on the team. You need to have technical people on the team. They need to be there from the application owners that are moving to the cloud. But you also need to have business people on the team, and they need to look at the expense of the cloud and the complexity of the billing and the complexity of how you're going to have and avoid things like cost overruns. They're called overages in the cloud space. So you need to have the whole organization having some sort of representation there.
And what are some of those factors that can cause or surprising cost overruns? Is it simply the extraction of data, or are there other things that people need to be smart about with respect to making sure they have control over the costs?
That's an excellent question, because it varies from cloud service provider. But when you're evaluating your cloud service providers, you do need to look at your network cost. That's a huge thing. Some cloud service providers, like Oracle, only charge for data going out over the cloud over the internet. Other cloud providers charge for data going in and out, regardless if it's over the internet or a private connection. Other cloud providers don't only just charge for your storage, they charge for every read and write to your storage, which has a huge risk when it comes to predictability of the expense. And then also look at the other costs for the cloud providers. Some of them lock you into a configuration that you can't change. Some of them charge you for customer service. So you pay for charge, but you have a separate line item, and you might not even realize you had to have purchased that till you actually have an issue. You have to open up a tech support call and then realize you suddenly have a large expense every month just to have the privilege of doing that. So you really need to understand that total cost behind it. And that's a place we're having a partner coming in like Mythics, because we have a lot of experience with the federal government. We also have experience with some of our challenges our customers have had. And we can kind of help point out some of the things that the different cloud service providers do that can cause those overages. And some of the CSPs, cloud service providers, their business model is actively looking for overages as well, which is a surprise.
Yeah, so I guess to be smart, it may sound simplistic, but you almost need to take a checklist approach in the beginning before an engagement so that you know what to expect, or at least what questions to ask.
Yeah, you absolutely need to come in armored with questions and more than what the sales teams would normally tell you from the different CSPs. Otherwise, you will end up with expenses you weren't prepared for.
Tom, that's I think unexpected expense that a lot of customers run into. It's kind of like a tax on top of your cloud infrastructure is just trying to even figure out what your bill is, and where all the different components are coming from in very complex environments. So, having a nice, simple, easy to understand bill that is, predictable is important.
All right. And I want to ask you about a related issue. I guess we have to have some flexibility and almost an agile approach in going to the cloud. But the government writ large has learned in the past few years of its need for general agility, let's say. And the COVID pandemic did put a lot of pressure on agencies to do some technology upgrades and operational changes in a big hurry so that they could have continuity of operation. But we've also seen that need for agility and ability to respond rapidly to change simply in some of the many new programs that have gotten rolled out going back to several administrations. We had Cash for Clunkers, for example, or the rollout of the the Affordable Care Act. These caused a lot of stress. Now we have had recent and perhaps more to come appropriations for new programs related to the pandemic, and those put pressure on agencies to stand up applications and data services very rapidly. So the COVID is one, but there's been many factors leading to this. How can cloud help with that sense of being able to be agile, and how can agencies use that pathway to make sure that they can bat whatever pitches come their way? Mark?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. That's a good question. And it is something, as you point out, that had been on the minds of people for a long time. It's just that some of the more recent events have sped up some of those actions, right? And so, like disaster recovery, that's a very simple one for most people to grasp. And it is not always there, believe it or not always the way, at least in the robust level they want. So a very simple way to start off and to think about that is to go to just a disaster recovery in the cloud, which gives you that robustness that you're talking about, and potentially even scalability for things like cache for clunkers. Rapid application development has been helped a lot of agencies right now, both at the federal and state and local level. The ability to roll out things like digital assistants, that chatbots that help people figure out on their own with plain English queries to be able to help themselves with, where am I going to go get a vaccination? How do I get a test? What do I need to take to the test? Things like that very quickly set up and rolled out. Oracle has contributed to the vaccination passport program, and we very rapidly developed with some other major industry companies, and to roll this out such that we'll be able to track and and guarantee that the people that say they've got a vaccination has gotten a vaccination. Something we rolled out internally, and we've contributed to the world, actually.
And Eric, let me ask you about that backup question, because I guess it's presumed, but maybe it's still a basic worry of many federal practitioners. And that is, if cloud is your continuity of operations backup, are cloud providers backed up with their own continuity of operations?
Yeah, that's really important to look at with cloud and combine that with the agility, because when you do a cloud service provider, you need to look at that availability. And one way I recommend customers is look at the service level agreements the cloud providers have. If your cloud provider doesn't have a service level agreement for uptime, you have an issue. But more importantly, if they don't have a service level agreement for availability of the manageability of the environment, they have an issue. If they don't have a service level agreement for performance, that's an issue, because you might buy services in the cloud and you're going to expect they perform a certain way. But if they don't perform that way and the cloud provider is not willing to stand behind it with an SLA, you need to start thinking, is that the right solution for you? And that also goes into agility in the cloud. A lot of cloud providers force you to buy the cloud how they want you to procure it. And those are often called shapes or instance types. And that's something some cloud providers force you, that if you want a certain amount of memory or CPU, you can only buy your 3 choices. You have to buy 4 cores and 16 gig of memory as an example. But you might have an application that only needs 2 cores and 100 gig of memory. And a lot of cloud providers lock you in. And so in order to get those requirements, you have to often buy more than you need to buy. And that's an advantage with like Oracle 2nd generation cloud, is that you can buy exactly what you need. You have that agility. If you want 3 cores, you could buy 3 cores and 3 gig of memory. You could buy 8 cores and 200 gig of memory. You have that flexibility, that agility to size it exactly to the needs of the mission. And that's another thing when you look at that agility in the cloud as well, that capability.
All right. On that note, we're going to take a good break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about how you get started in getting into the cloud. My guests today are Eric Benner. He's Vice President of Enterprise Transformation at Mythics, and Mark Johnson, the Vice President of DoD Tech and Cloud at Oracle. And I'm Tom Temin on the special Bulletin Review Enterprise Cloud Conversation, sponsored by Oracle and Mythics here on Federal News Network.